So as I was researching this race in this district, like everybody else, I assumed that this was a solid red district, voting red for a Republican for president, for Congress, to Albany, and in the city. It turns out the district has a 5-3 registration advantage for Democrats. So the question is, why does it have this perception of being so Republican? Did Democrats lose voters? Did it lose the message?
Yeah, no, I would actually contest the premise there. This isn't a Republican district. This isn't a Democratic district. This is a district filled with folks, many of whom are public servants, cops, and firemen, and teachers, and first responders, folks who really help keep the lights of this city on. And God bless them, they vote for the person, not the party. And they want to see a government that works here. And they're extraordinarily frustrated that for what I believe a generation now, they haven't seen a political class that's actually working for them. So this is a district that Barack Obama won in 2012. It's a district that has just as many locally elected Democrats as locally elected Republicans. Right here on Staten Island, we've got a great Democratic district attorney who was elected in 2015, about a year before Donald Trump won the district, and he won in a low turnout race. So under any circumstances, the right person with the right message, one that's truthful and bold and speaks to the way in which folks have been either ripped off or ignored, speaks to that, they can win. That's Staten Island, that's Southern Brooklyn.
So how do you get those voters back, and how do you run as a progressive without being too progressive for the district?
Well, that's the very problem with politics, is that a bunch of consultants sit around a table and they try to figure out a way that we're going to triangulate our way to victory. How can we balance this with balancing that? I'll tell you what works. Being truthful. That's what works. Telling people what you believe. And so here's what I believe. Right now we are faced with some of the most pressing challenges in our nation's history. Gun violence that is killing thousands and thousands of people every single year. Children on this island and in this district right now are afraid to go to math class. But beyond that, an opioid epidemic that's killing even more. We have healthcare costs, education costs that have been skyrocketing for far too long while everyone's wages are stagnating. A system that is working for just the top 1% and for multinational corporations that quite frankly do not need any more help. So we're not balancing anything here. But what we are doing is sending a very truthful message that's about damn time that government started working for the very people who are working their hearts out every day. And that's not only why we're going to win, but it's also, quite frankly, the right thing to say. And I'm upset and frustrated, as I know many other people are who live here, that elected officials and candidates have not been saying that for far too long.
As you talk to voters around the district, I assume many of them are unhappy. What's making them unhappy? Is it President Trump? Is it the policies he's pushing? What is it?
Their frustrations did not begin a year ago or 2 years ago. For as long as anyone can remember, Staten Islanders and folks living in Southern Brooklyn have had some of the longest commuting times of anyone in the nation. The opioid epidemic began longer than many of us can remember. Family members, neighbors, dying from overdoses that were entirely preventable. And so time and again, we haven't seen government actually seek to overcome these challenges and direct resources to them in a large and substantive way. Now, when you walk around this neighborhood, just like so many others in this district, you know what you're going to see? You're going to see American flags hanging outside people's doors. This district is filled with veterans. It's filled with cops. It's filled with firemen, just like I just said, and so many other public servants. And I believe that what they want to see is they want to see a government that is solving problems, just like we did with the Interstate Highway Act in the 20th century, just like we did with the Apollo Project, just like we did at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, or overseas when it came to storming the beaches of Normandy or winning the Cold War. They want to see that type of government in the 21st century. And they haven't. Instead, what they see is that's our buddy, our campaign staffer, Bob. Instead, what they really want to see is politicians who are not just bickering, politicians who are not just waiting to send another tweet, but instead elected officials who are willing to work across the aisle when necessary, but also present and pursue bold programs no matter what the political consequences may be. And they have not seen that for a very long time.
You have a very compelling personal story. You were served as a captain in the Army. You were injured in Afghanistan, Bronze Star and Purple Heart. You were the chief of staff of a nonprofit healthcare organization. How much of this campaign is going to be selling you, and how much of your story is going to be critical to your success as a candidate?
I'm not selling myself in this election. But what we are seeking to do is earn voters' trust. And that is not happening often. And it certainly hasn't happened in this district and across the country for quite some time. Because before we talk about specific policies, if folks don't trust you, then you don't have anything. So my military record, I've been in the military now for 8 years, it pales in comparison to what some soldiers post 9/11 have done. I've got friends that have deployed 6, 7, 8, 9 times. Soldiers who have been injured in combat, rehabbed over the course of many years so they could deploy again. What I'm seeking to do each and every day is tell their story. Tell their story because they don't only speak to amazing examples of service, they speak to all of our potential as a country, our potential to actually overcome big challenges again. And as a company commander in the National Guard, I still get to see these soldiers. I still get to serve alongside them, and they're a constant reminder that they're the story of this country. They represent what we're truly capable of. That's what really matters. But it's important that I do have experience outside of the military as well. As the chief of staff for a large healthcare company, a nonprofit that provides primary care and behavioral health and care management and a series of wraparound services to people who need it the most in this city, I've seen how much the healthcare system needs to be improved. I've seen how much we need to not just establish universal healthcare coverage in this country, but we need to also cut costs. And there's plenty and plenty of opportunities to do that. I've got experience on the ground in criminal justice reform. We need to start sending leaders to Washington, D.C. who are not just willing to reject political consequences, or at least ignore them, but who are also coming with the knowledge to tackle some of these enormous challenges that we face. Right here on Staten Island, we not only opened up a clinic, my organization, but we also, in partnership with Community Health Action Network of Staten Island and the DA's office, opened up a 24/7 recovery center to push people away from the criminal justice system towards the recovery they so desperately need. We need to see programs like this nationwide, and I'm prepared to do that.
You're calling for universal health care, but that was certainly a source of derision 8 years ago when the Obamacare debate first happened. How do you sell universal health care in 2018?
The sore spot when it came up in the national dialogue is we focused on just coverage and not cost. So what we have to do as a party and as a country is come to terms with the fact that for a generation or more now, people's healthcare costs have exceeded inflation each and every year. And let's put this in the simplest of terms. All right? Our system is ridden with perverse incentives, it's ridden with waste, and it's ridden with excessive profit. And we've got to do something about that. And there's many different policy ways, policy routes that we can reach that goal. But if we just focus on coverage, we're not going to obtain that. So you'll see that I'm talking about both. There's some wonderful examples across the country for things that we can do. One example is what we see in Maryland today with all-payer rate setting, where hospitals are receiving global budgets and being told to work with that. So you can start to emphasize preventative care. You can start to emphasize cost savings. And we see overall and per capita value going up. We need to seriously consider nationalizing programs like this. So I do not believe that we need to engender macro transformative reform in order to obtain universal health care and lower costs. We can do it with these sensible reforms.
I want to ask you about a couple of other key issues that you mentioned. First of all, you talked about gun violence in the 11th District. What are the policies that you would pursue to try to curb that here in the district and elsewhere in the country?
Sure. Plain and simple. An assault weapon should never be sold in this country ever again. I know this weapon intimately. I carried it in combat. And it has one purpose. Its purpose is to kill as many people as possible. Its purpose is to shoot rounds that enter the body and do not leave it. It has no place in this country. But if we just stop there, we have not done nearly enough, because we all know that the vast majority of gun deaths in this country, come at the hand of handguns in inner city America. Just here in New York City, close to 90% of weapons retrieved from gun crimes originate from out of state, often down south. We need universal background checks. Universal. I don't care if it's a secondhand sale, an internet sale, a gun fair. you need to be able, if you want to buy a weapon, you have to get a background check, and that background check should also encompass a comprehensive mental health check. But we can't stop there either. When it comes to magazine capacity, we need to make it so you can't just turn a Glock or another handgun into an assault weapon. You should not have a magazine in this country sold that takes more than 10 rounds. We need to overturn the boyfriend loophole. So if I commit an act of domestic violence as a boyfriend, I still can't buy a weapon, or a girlfriend. I still can't buy a weapon. The T-Hart Amendment needs to be overturned so local law enforcement agencies can get access to that gun crime trace data so they can truly ensure public safety. This isn't just about keeping our neighborhoods safe. It's not just about keeping our schools safe. This is also about keeping cops safe. We have seen a dramatic reduction in crime and violence against police officers when these sensible reforms, like I just put forth, are instituted at the state level. And I intend on seeing that nationwide. So I will not be an agent of the NRA like we see from this Republican Party, like we see from my opposition. They are an agent of the gun industry, not law-abiding gun owners. We can ensure public safety while respecting an individual's right to own a weapon, so long as they are law-abiding.
Next topic, opioid abuse. The opioid problems in Staten Island are well documented. What policies would you pursue? What would you recommend to try to stem the opioid crisis here as well as across the country?
We have seen what we're capable of before. Think about at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Every arm of the federal government and state governments and local governments sprung to action. And we saw massive investments in education, prevention, and treatment. We need to do the same today. And we're not seeing that necessary resource allocation. There aren't enough clinics in this district that are suited and prepared to deal with this crisis from both a prevention standpoint as well as a treatment standpoint. We don't have nearly enough practitioners who are certified to administer medically assisted treatment. We don't have nearly enough inpatient beds. You know, from an education standpoint as well, think about it this way. If you and I, 30, 40 years ago, were going to get into a vehicle, neither of us would be wearing seatbelts. Both of us would probably be smoking a cigarette. That's dramatically changed in this country. The only reason it has changed is because of massive education campaigns, and we need one centered around the opioid epidemic. We need to crack down on prescription pills flooding our market, distributors who have bought off our politicians, bought them off, so that they can continue to flood our communities with prescription pills that only lead to more addictions to opiates. And you know what, though? We also have to come to terms with the fact that many, many people now are not starting with prescription pills. They're jumping right to heroin. And so there's a law enforcement component to this as well. We need to get to the central nodes of distribution that are allowing for heroin to get to our neighbors' children. This is the greatest public health crisis facing this community, and all we have seen from current elected officials, my opponents included, is inaction and rhetoric. And I am tired of it, and I know I'm not alone.
You have raised a lot of money from outside the district. You've been supported or endorsed, rather, by the Staten Island Democrats, but also by the DCCC and by Steny Hoyer. I saw a quote from a spokesperson for the Donovan campaign, basically trying to paint you as being an outsider who's just jumped into this district. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's probably Dan Donovan's only option, and he probably decided to say that to me after he spoke with a bunch of overpriced consultants sitting around a table. You know, when you look at Dan Donovan's filings, it's very revealing. For a long time now, Dan Donovan, as well as Michael Grimm, may I add, have taken hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate PACs, corporate PAC money. When a corporate PAC gives you money, this is not like an individual giving money. They have one objective, and that is to buy you off and ensure that their profit continues to grow. And Dan Donovan openly takes hundreds of thousands of dollars of money from them. You want to talk about outside influence. So I'm proud of our fundraising. I am proud of the fact that at this point, as a challenger to an incumbent Republican, in a district that you began this interview by saying that folks think we don't have a chance of winning, that we have more cash on hand than he does. So that's their only shtick. He's got outside. No one controls this campaign except for our voters.
I have to ask you, do you take any PAC money?
I do not take corporate PAC money, not a cent.
Wouldn't take it even if offered?
I've already been offered, and I've rejected it. And that's not just going to happen during my campaign. This is for the duration of my congressional career. I will not take a cent of corporate PAC money. But you know what the experts told me to do? They said, look, Max, don't leave that money on the table, okay? You have to go and play by the rules of the game. Well, we're not going to wait, okay? We are going to reject that today as well as for the duration of my career because it's the right thing to do. And despite doing that, I still last quarter outraised Dan Donovan by hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Looking ahead to November, if you're lucky enough to be the Democratic nominee, would you rather face Dan Donovan or Michael Grimm?
I spend very little time thinking about Dan Donovan or Michael Grimm. And for all this conversation about how these two folks are different, and they are fighting it out in an ugly battle, and no one has any idea who's going to win, but Dan Donovan's scared. But despite all this talk about how they are different, let's talk about how they're exactly the same. They both had a chance in Washington, D.C. to do something about opioids. They both had a chance to do something about gun violence. They both take hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate PACs. They are both fighting over who loves Donald Trump more. They are so beholden to him. That's not what people want here. They don't want a politician who's beholden to corporations and the president. They want a fighter, an independent fighter who will just answer to them. Dan Donovan's not the answer, nor is Michael Grimm. So we'll have to see what happens, but I'm prepared to beat either of them by a wide margin.
Finally, to wrap it up, 20 seconds or less, who is Max Rose? What do you want people to know and remember about you as the candidate?
20 seconds? I don't even need that much. All right. I'm honest. I'm a fighter. I'm going to fight for the people in this district. I'm not beholden to anyone but them. And it's about time that the federal government does something about these problems that have been here for far too long. And I'm going to be the guy that makes sure that happens.